PHI 201. You're welcome to study session 9. Contextualism. Introduction. In this study session, we will examine contextualism, which is another theory of justification. Our focus will be on the contextualist theories of David Harness and Kate D. Rose. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to define and use correctly the term contextualism. 2. Discuss David B. Harness' contribution to contextualism. 3. Appraise Kate D. Rose's contextualist argument. And 4. Discuss the objections to contextualism. Defining contextualism. Contextualism describes a collection of views in philosophy which emphasize the context in which an action, utterance, or expression occurs. It holds that in some important respect, actions, utterances, or expressions can only be understood relative to that context. It also holds that philosophical controversial concepts such as meaning P, knowing that P, having a reason to A, and possibly even being true or being right only have meaning relative to a specified context. In epistemology, contextualism treats the word know as context-sensitive. Context-sensitive expressions are those that express different propositions relative to different contexts of use. For example, some terms that are relatively uncontroversial, considered context-sensitive, are indexical, such as I, here, and now. While the word I has a constant linguistic meaning in other contexts of use. Whom it refers to varies with context. The main tenet contextualist epistemology, no matter what account of knowledge it is linked to, is that knowledge attributions are context sensitive. This is when we attribute knowledge to somebody. What matters is the context in which we use the term knowledge. The standards for attributing knowledge to someone, to contextualist claims, vary from one user's context to the next. Thus, if I say John knows that his car is in front of him, the utterance is true if and only if 1. John believes that his car is in front of him. 2. The car is in fact in front of him. 3. John meets the epistemic conditions. David B. Harness on contextualism. According to David B. Harness, the most neglected component in justification theory is the actual social practices and norms of justification of a culture of community of people. To determine whether S is justified in believing H, we must consider the actual standards of justification of the community of people to which it belongs. More specifically, we determine whether S is justified by believing H by specifying an issue context raised within a community of people G with certain social practices and norms of justification. It is only this that determines the level of understanding and knowledge S is expected to have and the standard E is expected to satisfy. In an attempt to further explain contextualism as a theory of justification, David Harness opines that when asked whether S is justified in believing H, this has to be considered relative to an issue context. Using his example, suppose we are interested in whether Jones, an ordinary non-medical trained person, has the general information that polio is caused by a virus. If his response to this question is that he remembers the paper reporting that Salk said it was, then this is good enough. He has performed adequately given the issue context. But suppose the context is an examination for the MD degree. Here, we expect a lot more. If the candidate simply said what John did, we would take him as being very deficient in knowledge. Thus, relative to one issue context, a person may be justified in believing H but not satisfied relative to another context. The issue context is what specific issue involving H is being raised. It determines the level of understanding and knowledge that S must exhibit, and it determines an appropriate objector group. For example, in the context of the examination for the MD degree, the appropriate group is not the class of ordinary non-medical training people, but qualified medical examiners. The importance attached to the outcome of accepting H when it is false or rejecting H when it is true is a component of the issue context. Suppose the issue is whether a certain drug will help cure a disease in human without harmful effect. In such a situation, we are much more demanding than if the question were whether it would help in the case of animals. In both cases, the appropriate objector group would be the same, namely qualified researchers. But they would require more proof in the former case. Researchers do in fact strengthen or weaken justificatory condition in relation to the importance of the issue. If accepting H when H is false would have critical consequences, the researcher may increase the required significance level in testing H. Davis Harness described man as a social animal, and this fact must not be neglected when it comes to justification of beliefs. Therefore, going by the contextualist model of justification as seen above, when asking whether some person S is justified in believing H, we must consider this relative to some specific issue context which determine the level of understanding and knowledge required. This in turn determines the appropriate objector group. For S to be justified in believing H relative to the issue context, S must be able to meet all current objections falling into A and B, which expresses a real doubt of the qualified objector group, where the objectors are critical truth seekers. Thus, social information, the beliefs, information, and theories of others plays an important part in justification, for it in part determines what objections will be raised, how a person will respond to them, and what responses the objectors will accept. David Harness stressed neither point that the fact that justification is relative to the social practices and norm of a group does not suggest that they cannot be criticized, nor that justification somehow subjective. The practices and norms are epistemic and hence have their goals truth and the avoidance of error, and in so far as they fail to achieve these goals, they can be criticized. For instance, if the people of a particular group rely on the authority of the elders, this authority can be questioned if they find out that it leads to so many false perceptual beliefs. An objection to a practice must not only be real, but must also be local as opposed to global. Kate DeRose contextualist argument. Contextualism refers to the position that the truth conditions knowledge ascribing and knowledge denying sentences, that is, sentences of the form S knows that P and S doesn't know that P, and related variants of such sentences vary in certain ways according to the context in which they are uttered. What so varies is the epistemic standard that S must meet, that is, or, in the case of a denial of knowledge, fail to meet, in order for such a statement to be true. In some context, S knows that P requires for its truth that S have a true belief that P and also be in a very strong epistemic position with respect to P, while in other contexts, the very same sentence may require for its truth, in addition to S having a true belief that P only that S meets some lower epistemic standards. Thus, the contextualist will allow that one speaker can truly say S knows that P, while another speaker, in a different context where higher standards are in place, can truthfully say S doesn't know that P, though both speakers are talking about the same S and the same P at the same time. According to Kate DeRose, the character of S knows P requires that S should believe P, that P should be true, and that S should be in good enough epistemic position with respect to P. But what is good enough varies with context. Hence, the context of a knowledge attribution is the level of epistemic position that counts as good enough in that context. For example, the character of know in Clara knows there is water in the glass, while require that Clara should believe there is water in the glass, that this belief should be true, and that Clara should be in a good enough position to determine that there is water in the glass. But whether Clara is in good enough position will vary with the attributor's context. Where the attributor's interest is in watery plant, the content of knowledge in Clara knows that there is water in the glass requires that Clara's position is good enough if she has the typical person's ability to identify water, in which case Clara knows that there is water in the glass is true. If, however, the attributor is engaged in an important experiment, the content of know in Clara knows that there is water in the cup requires that Clara's position is good enough only if she performs a chemical analysis, in which case Clara knows that there is water in the cup, is false. That is, assuming that she has not done the analysis. Kate DeRose proposes a conditional theory which has it that suppose S has a true belief P, which S would not believe P if P were false. The belief is sensitive, where S would believe P even if P were false. The belief is insensitive. DeRose endorsed a rule of sensitivity. Whenever someone asserts that S knows that P, standards of knowledge arise to require S believe P to be sensitive, and the resulting standard applies for all beliefs in that context. The invariantist, Peter Ongers, good name for one who denies contextualism, will not subscribe to the above. According to her, there's a single invariant set of standards which, at least as far as truth conditions go, govern the use of knowledge, attributions, regardless of the context in which they are uttered. Thus, the two speakers can't both be speaking a truth. She does not endorse contextualism, so construed. In spite of Unger's non-endorsement, it is important to point out that in different conversational contexts, quite different standards govern whether ordinary speakers will say that someone knows something. What we are happy to call knowledge in some context, we will deny knowledge in another context. The invariantist need not deny this, and if she is wise, she won't deny it. Neither will deny that this is very useful feature of our use of the relevant sentences. What she must deny is that this varying standard for when ordinary speakers attribute knowledge, or for when they are in some sense warranted in attributing knowledge, reflect varying standards for when it is or would be true for them to attribute knowledge. For again, according to the variantist, the truth condition of the relevant sentence do not vary in the relevant way. Contextualism, so understood then, is a position about knowledge attribution, that is, sentences attributing knowledge to a subject, and denial of knowledge, precisely, a thesis about their truth condition. This has been known to give rise to the following type of outburst. Your contextualism isn't a theory about knowledge at all. It's just a theory about knowledge attribution. Contextualism, as described thus far, can be viewed as a thesis about knowledge attributing and denying sentences. We can construe contextualism regarding justification as an analog of what we are calling contextualism about knowledge. According to contextualists about justification, the standards for justified belief that a subject must meet in order to render true a sentence describing belief of us as justified vary with context. The relation between knowledge and justification is controversial, and neither of these forms of contextualism clearly implies the other. If one holds that a belief's being justified is necessary condition for its being a piece of knowledge, then one may believe that the two forms of contextualism, that is, contextualism about knowledge and contextualism about justification, are closely related. Perhaps it is because the standards for justification vary with context that the standards for knowledge so vary. However, it's widely accepted today that more is needed for knowledge than simply justified true belief, and it may be varying requirement for that something more that it reflects in the varying standard for knowledge, in addition to or instead of varying standard for justification. Contextualism's greatest advantage is its response to skepticism. Skeptics raised radical possibilities such that we might be dreaming. The contextualist grants that such doubts are legitimate in every situation. Objection to contextualism. A. Straightforward relativist about truth. Those who claim a proposition may be true for one group, yet false for another group, appear to hold that a single proposition can be both true and false. This seems incoherent. The notion of truth is no longer in play, but has been replaced by truth for and truth from a point of view. Subject-based contextualism escapes this worry, for while S knows P is true or false depending on S context, S knows P in context C is true from all points of view. The attributor-based contextualist, however, holds that truth of statements having the form of S knows P or S knows P in context C, where C refers to the subject, S contexts are relative to attributors context. It seems that there is no truth about whether S knows P, whether only truth for or truth from a point of view. B. Warranted assertability objection. The issue dividing invariantists and contextualists is not whether in different conversational contexts, quite different standards govern whether ordinary speakers will say that someone knows something. Of course, what we are happy to call knowledge in some low standard context, we will deny is knowledge in other, that is, high standards context. The issue is whether these varying standards for when ordinary speakers will attribute knowledge and or for when they are in some sense warranted in attributing knowledge reflect varying standards for when it is or would be true for them to attribute knowledge. The contextualist will appeal to pairs of cases where the standards of knowledge seem to vary. Low standard cases in which a speaker seems truthfully to ascribe knowledge to a subject will be paired with high standard cases in which another speaker in quite different and more demanding context seems truthfully to describe that same subject as a non-knower. If the contextualist has chosen a pair of cases well, there will be a quite strong intuition about each assertion, at least when it is considered individually, that it is true. The invariantist, of course, cannot accept that both of the speaker's assertions are true, and so must deny a quite strong intuition. But it is often argued The idea of varying standards for the warranted assertability of knowledge attribution can help the variantist explain away the intuition that is hostile to her. Study session summary. In this study session, we examined contextualism both as a theory of justification and as a theory of knowledge. We saw that our knowledge claims and the justification for them can be done within a relevant context and also depending on the attributor's context. We have come to the end of study session 10. Thanks for listening.